Work less, but get more done. Sounds like the dream, doesn't it? Seriously, less hours, better results. I don't know about you, but I'm all in. And that's exactly what we'll be discussing on this hidden gem with the man whose name has become synonymous with optimizing productivity by working less, Dr. Alex Pang. Welcome to the Catalyst 360 podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Brad Cooper of Catalyst Coaching 360, and today's guest is best-selling author of several books, including the latest hit, Shorter, Work Better, Smarter, and his other book, The Distraction Addiction. Dr. Pang has a Ph.D. in the history of science, and his work has appeared in Scientific American, The Atlantic Monthly, American Scholar, the Los Angeles Times, as well as a variety of scholarly journals. If you've been thinking about pursuing a career as a health and wellness coach, or maybe you're a clinician, leader, facilitator considering adding coaching certification to your toolbox, our next MBHWC approved health and wellness coach certification kicks off soon. We'd love to have you join us. Or maybe you're already a coach and you've been pondering joining us for the 5th annual Rocky Mountain Coaching Retreat and Symposium this September in gorgeous Estes Park, Colorado. Things are just about full, so if that's you, don't wait any longer. All the details for both the certification and the retreat are available on our Institute site, catalystcoachinginstitute.com, or you can email us anytime with questions, results@catalystcoaching360.com. Now it's time to learn how less really can be more with Dr. Alex Pang on the latest episode of the Catalyst 360 podcast. It is definitely a privilege to have you join us. As we were talking about briefly offline, this is something that I'm personally struggling with. I think a lot of our listeners are probably thinking, wow, this topic is right up my alley for my life right now. And so we're really excited to have you join us and welcome aboard.
Well, thanks very much. It's good to be with you.
So let's get this out of the way early. You're saying I can work less, but get more done. What's the catch? Yeah, what are you selling me here, buddy?
So, I mean, there really is no catch. I mean, I think that first of all, there are studies of, time use in companies, sort of in organizations that show that, something that I think we all sort of intuit, which is that most of us end up sort of wasting between 2 hours and 4 hours of productive time every day. Wow. Through multitasking, unnecessary meetings, sort of other kinds of sort of friction or sort of sand in the gears that otherwise that reduce the amount of time that we actually have for getting stuff done. And so, being able but also that when you look at the ways in which some of history's most productive, prolific, and creative people worked, one of the interesting things you find is that these are people who organized their entire lives around their work, sometimes choosing where to live, who to marry, based partly on a sense that, that they were going to have to balance sort of these big choices against their own intellectual ambitions. But they also did not spend their entire days working. Indeed, they would spend, 4 or 5 hours a day focused really, really hard on key work. And they were really good at figuring out at what times of day they were most productive, sort of ruthless about saying no to things that did not advance their most important work. And they spent a surprising amount of time, to modernize, in, doing stuff that we would think of as completely unproductive, right? Hobbies, exercise, long walks, that kind of thing. And so sort of between the fact that we, that number one, that are sort of that are modern ways of organizing sort of office life or work life actually have an awful lot of sort of unproductive time built into them, and second, that there are that we have lots of really rich examples of ways in which we can optimize our work days to sort of to allow us to focus and to do to do our best work in relatively few hours, and those all of that I think indicates that if we're smart about it, we can figure out how to design our days so that we work fewer hours, but we still do work that is that is creative, that's satisfying, and that we can be proud of.
So, all right. So you work a lot of your work's with companies to try to help them integrate the 4-day work week. Do the concepts you bring to those organizations apply to individuals that are, they're listening to this, they're looking at their own schedule and they're trying to consider on a more broad basis?
I think that the basic principles apply whether you are, whether you're an individual or whether you're part of, a team or part of a big organization. Fundamentally, the kind of underlying rules that govern the ebb and flow of our attention, the amount of time we're able to focus. These are things that are stable so long as we're human, regardless of whether we are solopreneurs or whether we work in big organizations. The thing I think that is interesting when you look at what companies have been doing with these insights is that there are additional benefits that both companies and individuals get when you kind of synchronize this kind of redesign of people's time that make the benefits just a little bit more potent. So there's additional social reinforcement that you get when you have time for everybody to to focus on their most important work, for example. There's also somewhat an effect like, when you were in college and you were studying for finals in the library. Right, being around other people who are deeply focused has a kind of social contagion effect, and so I think that companies have demonstrated an ability to use these insights just as individuals who have a lot of freedom over their time have been able to use them for quite a while, and make the benefits of shorter hours and more focused hours available to everybody across an organization.
All right. Your book, which we'll link to in the description here, it gives a step-by-step plan. Without giving that away entirely, can you help us understand some of the initial steps for people that are wanting to make this a reality? Because I am. I'm trying to glean a lot from you today and figure out how can I take this in the right direction. I bet a lot of other people are too.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think if you're in an organization, I think that the first thing that just about every company does is make meetings a lot shorter, right? The 1 hour, all hands meeting turns into a 10-minute stand up with an agenda, with clear deliverables. It also often becomes a lot shorter. This is valuable for a couple of reasons. Number one, just you think about the amount of time that people spend in meetings. Getting a handle on that can free up hours for a lot of people. It's also important because it shows that there is this thing that we've all complained about, that we all know can be better, but which has proved really difficult to solve, but actually is solvable, and is solvable by working together. And it's a powerful lesson in how that kind of cooperation and collective action can serve to to solve problems that are really difficult for each of us to solve individually. So I think that and so virtually every place that that I work with and every place that has done this themselves talk about the first thing they always talk about is meetings. And so so that's where you start if you are if you're a company. If you're an individual, I think that the thing that you look first at is what time, figuring out the time of day during which you are at your kind of creative and productive peak, and then developing a kind of daily schedule and practice that ring fences that takes distractions out of it, and allows you to use that time to optimal effect. Because 2 or 3 hours of deeply focused time in productivity terms is worth 6 or 8 hours of kind of semi-distracted time in a state of continuous partial attention, as Linda Stone would have put it. So so that's those are the first things to do if you're a company. or if you're an individual.
So how do you break it in health and wellness, which a lot of folks listening to this are involved in that industry? It's so difficult to get away from your habits, your traditions, your routines, even if you know it's better. So I was thinking about today's schedule. I got up early, a little bit after 5 a.m. My first thing I typically do is get the dog up and then go down and read the Wall Street Journal online and check in on emails. But it's very low. I love mornings. So that would be, if I were talking to you, if you were consulting with me, you'd say, okay, Brad, that's your time. And yet I'm kind of throwing it away on low mental aspects because I really enjoyed that first hour of just kind of seeing what's going on in the world. How's the dog doing? Et cetera, et cetera. Would your guidance be, man, Brad, if you're dialed from 5 to 8 a.m., let's use that or would you say, you know what, maybe we just let's stay with the routine, but let's trim it down to 20 minutes and then let's jump in. What about and everybody has their different routine. That's just an example. But what do you say for those routines that people are comfortable with, but it's not necessarily the optimal use of my best time or someone's best time?
Okay, I think the first thing I would say is that it is eminently possible. It's within all of our abilities to sort of essentially experiment with these things, with our routines, to figure out whether or how we can improve them in order to reach whatever goals we want. It may be that, if you are in an especially, let's say, high stress job with a lot of uncertainty, that for the early morning, the most important thing is maybe being in control of your time and being able to do things at your pace rather than at a pace dictated by, whatever latest emergency or a priority comes up. If you are working on, if you are doing the kind of work that, where a couple hours of really focused time can be beneficial, then it might be that, devoting some of those hours to that work can be really, really, sort of helpful to you. An astonishing number of really creative people get up super early in order to in order to write or to do other other kinds of work. And I think that this is something that I do myself when I'm working on a book. And I find that not only is it really good as a way of imposing a kind of discipline on my day, forcing me to think about priorities and exactly what I want to get done, because I'm not a morning person. So if I'm going to get up, I'm going to use that time well. But also, creating time in the rest of my day so that, having gotten through some of the biggest stuff for the day, I feel like I have earned the right to a nap in the afternoon or a long walk or some other kind of, something else that's equally restorative. So, I think that and the last thing I would say is that generally, it takes about 3 weeks or so in order to figure out whether some rather different practice is something that you're comfortable with and is generating useful results so that you want to make it permanent. So, you don't have to try these things for, 6 months or a year in order to figure out whether they work. You can do shorter experiments that are a little bit more iterative. Maybe in your case, trying, doing some work, 15 minutes after you've gotten up at 5. Or it may be that, you need half an hour or 45 minutes to kind of ease into things. It's exactly, but these are things that you can, that you can figure out for yourself without a huge amount of, time or expense. It really is just, being mindful about what you're doing, being consistent about it for a few weeks, and then evaluating the results and deciding, okay, either you keep the practice you abandon it. And maybe you probably have some ideas now for the next thing that you can try out. So I think that, that nobody, I am, everybody has the capacity to sort of to figure out and iterate and improve on these practices. And it's just a matter of having a little bit of discipline and sort of, and being able to stick to something and to be able to reflect on it and have some measures that at the end allow you to make a decision about whether this is something that works for you or doesn't.
All right. So let's try this. So what about the person, what about in terms of routine or habit? A lot of habits are, I'm used to working 60 hours a week. Like, how can I get down to 40 or 30 or 25? So I'm hearing some voices in some people's heads, maybe mine, that say, well, yeah, I could cut that back, but then I wouldn't feel like I'm getting as much work done. And talking to you, you're saying, oh no, you can get as much done if you're more effective. But I don't know, there's something in my gut that says, and I know the right answer to this, but talk us through this a little bit, of the person that says, well, I'm just used to working a 12-hour day or a 10-hour day. I don't know what I'd do with myself if I did. What about that, the psychology behind that piece?
Sure. First off, I think that if you think about things that you've gotten good at, does it take, once you become expert at something, does it take you a lot longer to do that thing? Generally, it does not.
Great question.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the measures of expertise is that you do not spend the kind of time you did in year one, kind of flailing around, trying to figure out what it is that you're doing, of having sort of making elementary mistakes. You are a lot. One of the signal features of expertise and skill is that you are better at managing yourself and managing your time and doing in maybe minutes what it used to take hours to do. The problem is that we live in a culture that conflates long hours with dedication and professionalism. Yeah. And I think that that this is this is a very powerful default, but it is one that we can overcome. I had one company that switched to a 4-day week, and sort of the CEO said, I used to hire people, look for people who could sleep under their desks, and now I realize, I am not interested in the person who needs 12 hours to do something, right? What I want is the person who needs 6 hours to do that thing. And I think that what that indicates is both the power of the default that says that long hours equal something good, but also the fact that this is a default that is changeable. As for the question of what do you do with your time, people figure that out. I think I've one of the things that I always do when I'm spending time with companies that have moved to 4-day weeks is ask people what they do with their free time, and they do like shockingly wholesome things. Right? They go back. They start going back to the gym. They cook more. All the things that you do when you don't have enough time that aren't very healthy. Those habits you give up, and you kind of take back the ones that do you good. Yeah. You spend more time with family. You do more community stuff, and so I will not tell you what you should do with those hours that you get back, but it is much less of a problem than you think it's going to be. So. If you're smart enough to figure out how to move to something like a 4-day week or a 6-hour day, then you're smart enough to figure out what to do with your free time.
Okay, so let's talk about what you just threw out there: the 4-day week versus the 6-hour day. Mm-hmm. Technically about the same, but I was talking to somebody just the other day, and they were recommending lean to the 4-day week because that keeps work completely out of your head. You don't have the distraction. You're not thinking about it all day long while you're supposedly enjoying yourself. Whereas the 6-hour day, you may not do that, or the 4-hour day, or whatever we talk about, may not do that because you work, and then those extra 3-4 hours you've got, you're just ruminating. You're just like, oh man, that email that came through, that I didn't get that done. Do you have a strong preference to one or the other, or do you feel like, you know what, they're basically the same, it's how you handle it?
There is not yet strong evidence that indicates whether psychologically one of them is better than the other in terms of, reduction in rumination time or increased value for restoration. I think, for most organizations, it comes down to what the market will put up with. There are plenty of, there are some industries like advertising and PR where not a lot already happens on Fridays, right? Nobody publishes good news on Fridays. And so that's a natural day to cut out of the calendar. In other cases, companies that feel like, you need to have a kind of public face 5 days a week, reducing working hours across all 5 days feels like the more sensible thing. And then there are some cases where, companies or government offices will move to a shift system where people work 6-hour days, but the office is actually open 12 hours a day. And so your kind of interface with your customers, with your public actually expands, even as working hours for individuals goes down. And so that's another, which is important, with governments, because there's always suspicion about,
Sure.
the lazy bureaucrats, blah, blah, blah. But, if you can now deal with, if this is a change that makes it easier for the public to get public services, then people are much more likely to be in favor of it. So, but I think, and then past that, different people will maybe have preferences based upon other external things, child pickup, whether you have hobbies where being able to, get away for 2.5 days would be like a game-changing thing. But we don't yet really know whether, in terms of sort of long-term psychological benefit or health benefits, whether moving to a 6-hour day is better than moving to 4 8-hour days. That's just something we gotta, something I hope someone is able to answer before long.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. You mentioned objectively tracking some of this stuff. Let's run down that path a little bit. So someone says, okay, I'm going to give this a shot. I'm all in. What would be some of the things you'd recommend they do track? So it's not simply they've just eliminated part of their job, but they're literally getting the same things or more done, and yet not working 60-hour weeks, 50-hour weeks, et cetera.
Right. So it is important to have sort of some measure, to have measures or standards for success during your trial period. You think most companies will do a trial, let's say, of 3 months, during which you try and figure out how to make all this work. It's a highly experimental period. You're trying a whole bunch of new practices, and at the end of that, you make a decision: does this feel like something that the organization can sustain? Generally, most places will not use radically different measures than they had previously. So, if it's revenues, whether it's meeting project deadlines, there may, sort of customer satisfaction, you keep the same things, partly because you're doing enough other surgery to the rest, to your organization, so that you don't need to try and figure out some complicated new KPI or OKR on top of all of that. The other thing is that in order to make this work, you need to give people both some clear standards by which they can measure their progress, but also plenty of freedom to figure out how to redesign their jobs, how to redesign their working hours so that they can meet these objectives. No boss in a company larger than maybe 2 people is going to be able to tell everybody how to do their jobs in 4 days rather than 5. People are experts at their own work.
Right.
And if you give them the freedom, they will be able to figure this out for themselves. But you need to give them the freedom to do that. At the same time, you need some kind of measure that gives them confidence that they're doing the right thing, that they're moving in the right direction. So for most places, what that means is you stick with the same measures that you've been using all along. And then on top of that, you might add something like NPS scores, or some kind of, places will use weekly surveys that measure collaboration level, happiness in the workplace. There were a few different services that do that sort of thing. And being able to particularly measure those before a trial and during and after, can be useful as a way of getting a sense of not just, are we making enough to keep the lights on, but are people happier? Are they, do they feel like they're working better with their colleagues? Because that in turn will tell you will give you other data about how sustainable this is going to be over the long run. Because, if you can maintain the same levels of productivity, but people are getting really, really stressed, then that suggests you're probably not going to be able to maintain this, for very long, and you've got to make some kind of course correction.
All right. So as I've said, I love this idea. I've been trying to, knowing this interview has been coming up, I've been trying to implement my own version of this over several months, but I keep getting pulled back in. It's like gravity's drawing me in. What are some of the pitfalls that I'm probably falling for that you've seen out there, that people, they do this for a couple of months, and then they start drifting back to the, whatever it was before, 40, 50, 60-hour weeks?
Correct. What I see in organizations who try it and then abandon it are a couple things. One of them is you have people who are, some cadre of younger people who are less experienced, who feel like either they're not going to get the kind of professional development that their peers working longer hours will have, or they just don't have the expertise necessary to redesign their jobs.
Okay.
Generally people who really dive into this with head first are folks who have enough professional experience so that they feel so that they know how to do their jobs, they know what's broken in the industry, and they feel experienced enough to be able to fix it. Very often they're also, parents of young children, so they have a really strong incentive to figure out how to how to win back more time for themselves. I think also that in a couple cases, there were places where, investors rebelled, or where they felt like it had too adverse an effect on company culture, that, that one place, for example, allowed everyone to choose their own day off. And this is a video production company, so people were already spending a lot of time out with clients, and so, and so the office felt like a ghost town. And so, they pulled back because they didn't like where the effect that it was having on the kind of sociability of the company. So, but I think that, more broadly, it is always really tough to try to implement a change like this in a world that hammers the message that, that overwork is both inescapable and inevitable and a good thing.
Right.
And, that sneaking, and moving away from that sneaking suspicion that, that if, that on the day that you're taking off, there is some big opportunity that, some potential new client, or, something that you are going to miss because you are no longer always on and always available is, I think that is a genuine anxiety that you've got to kind of learn to overcome. The good news, though, is that it certainly is possible to overcome it, and that the benefits that come over time from learning either how to rest better yourself, redesigning your days, or as part of an organization, figuring out how to do this for everybody, that the benefits outweigh whatever, potential, kind of theoretical lost opportunities that might that might be left on the table because you're now everyone's working a 6-hour day or 30 or 6-hour day or 4-day week.
Right. Okay. You've given me some traction here. I don't want. I've just got a couple of questions left. I don't want to have us wrap this up without touching on one of your early books, The Distraction Addiction. That seems to be such a big issue. I'd say bigger than any time in my lifetime before. What are some of the insights from that book that might get us rolling in the right direction in terms of distractions? Things that might surprise people, not your typical stuff, but what are things that people might go, wait, what? That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the key messages of the distraction addiction was that we need to think of our relationships with technologies a little differently than we normally do, right? Humans actually have an incredible capacity to use technologies to kind of extend our physical abilities and our cognitive abilities. Philosophers talk about this idea of the extended mind, which and the short version is that humans are amazingly good at offloading certain kinds of tasks onto our phones or to paper or such, and that this is actually something that makes us more human. One of the things that social media and other kinds of very distracting technologies do is kind of hack into that relationship, and so that the end result is not our own enhancement, our own the improvement of our own cognitive abilities, but sort of an improvement in our companies' abilities to reach us with targeted advertising, or to nudge us to certain other kinds of behaviors. And so really, the key these days is not to figure out how to escape from technology, but rather to be more thoughtful about to take notice of the effect that it has on us, and to be able to kind of rethink and redesign our relationships with it, so that we're able to get what we want from it, rather than what Facebook and Twitter want. I think that however, once you begin to be armed with that knowledge, it is that can start you on the process of making more thoughtful choices, rather than kind of defaulting to what the system wants you to do, and help you kind of take back control of your relationship with your devices. Fortunately, in the last few years, we've had things like sort of reports on screen time, the implementation of focus time in iOS, focus modes in Windows, that go some way to helping us sort of deal with some of these issues. And I think that the kind of toolbox that we have for helping us manage this, fortunately, has gotten better. But of course, companies also themselves are getting better at developing ever newer ways of trying to capture and commoditize and resell our attention. But I think that the most important thing to recognize is that these relationships are very powerful. They're part of what make us human, and that if we can regain control over them, then we can have much better and much more human lives with these technologies than we can otherwise.
I love what you said. I was just jotting a note down here. Be clear, be purposeful about what we want out of it versus what, fill in the blank social media company wants out of it. So essentially you're saying you get to be the chief technology officer of your life. Like, that's what we need to be doing. We need to be analyzing how much time is being spent. Why are we using Twitter? What is the purpose of Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat or whatever? And is that producing the outcome we want, just like a CTO would do for a company? I love that. Love that.
Exactly.
What about outside of the technology side? Any other aspects of the distraction piece that maybe we haven't really considered before?
That is a good question. I mean, it's the book came out 8 years ago, so it's been a while. But I think that let me think for a second.
Sure.
It is absolutely the case that I think over the last year and a half, one of the things that we have learned is the degree to which our attention and the degree to which we are able to spend our time well on on the things that we mean to spend them on really depend on developing and being in a world that supports supports routines, right? Good practices. Routines are the sort of thing that tend to get a bad rap, right? Something that is routine is, it's kind of dull.
Negative,
it's not,
right.
But yeah, exactly. However, as I think we've all had a year and a half in which our normal lives, have been sort of, to one degree or another blown up. And I think we've seen that, in point of fact, routines are an essential foundation for having good lives and for doing good work.
Yes.
And in a sense, they provide us a way, sort of when they serve us well, one of the things that they do is help us focus our time on the things that really matter to us, rather than distract our time onto things that do not. And so I guess in a way, if I were writing a sequel to The Distraction Addiction, it would be about focus and distraction around time rather than around, around cognition and attention. I think you can apply the same kinds of principles and rules to how we spend our time, just as, how we spend the firing of our neurons.
Yeah.
And the last year shows how important it is to pay attention to both of those.
Beautiful. Very well said. And thank you for taking the time to say, you know what, I'm not going to give you a rote answer. Let me think about this for a second. So nice job. All right, last question. Occasionally we like to
pass the audition.
You did good. Every once in a while we like to ask our guests, how are you applying this in your life? So are there some things that you've been doing over the last 18 months based on your research, based on your ongoing reading, that have changed that you've seen be effective, either in terms of distractions or in terms of fine-tuning your own work schedule?
I do all the stuff that I talk about in rest, right? I get up super early to write. I've become a huge fan of naps. I have 2 dogs, and so I spend a lot of time outdoors with them. And, normally I'm, in California, in the Bay Area, which has fantastic networks of parks and trails and things. So it's really a great place to both be super focused at in the way that Silicon Valley kind of expects, but also to put that aside and to get out. I think that over the last year and a half, are there things that I have done differently? In my own life, the thing that I have missed most has been the ability to travel. Obviously for self-evident reasons. And I think that while getting up to do a 3 a.m. talk in California to, sort of a morning session in Munich reproduces some of the feeling of being on an airplane and jet lagged, it's still not exactly the same, the same thing. But it has reminded me of the degree to which being on the road actually was an opportunity to practice in a different kind of mode many of the things that I talk about shaping and improving work at home. That the things that I liked best about being on the road often were being able in the evenings to go on like long walks in London or Seoul, right, or wherever, and think through and reflect on the stuff that I've been doing during the day. The opportunity to to have periods where you're both working really hard at a keynote, at a conference, at a client site, but also structured time where where you're sitting on the plane and you really can do nothing but listen to the hum of the engine, and and you just, and the best, and have these long stretches where the best thing you can do is just let your mind go and ruminate. I think that and I've realized that, the thing that while I had not really thought of travel as an opportunity to practice these rules for rest and for kind of organizing your days, that kind of organically happened, which I think is a testament to the fact you know, even, you know, even during those times in our lives where, you know, you're having to make sure, you know, you got to get to the airport by this time, you know, you've got very strict, you know, you're
right.
very
There's
strict
no
deadlines or places you've got to be. There's no flexibility there, but even in, you know, even in those kinds of schedules, it is possible to find periods that you can reclaim for yourself, that can rebalance that kind of intensivity of work. And, you know, if you look for it, you can find the time for that kind of rest and reflection that, you know, not only make your life better, but make your work better.
Beautiful. Dr. Pang, great stuff, man. Thanks. We worked really hard to get this interview lined up. You did great. It was worth the wait. Good luck with everything you're dealing with on your end. Really appreciate the time.
Oh, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
All right. Who's ready to do less? Great stuff, Dr. Pang. Thank you so much. Again, his book is titled Shorter, Work Better, Smarter. Thanks for tuning into the #1 podcast for health and wellness coaching. Our audience has been doubling every year for the past few years. That's thanks to you sharing the podcast with others. So thank you. It really does mean a lot to us. If you're an employer, EAP, or wellness service provider looking for an easy way to integrate the very best in nationally board certified health and wellness coaching into your program or platform, Catalyst Coaching 360 might be exactly what you've been seeking. Reach out to us anytime. Results at catalystcoaching360.com. We'll set up some time to discuss ideas. That's results at catalystcoaching360.com, or you can access the website catalystcoaching360.com. And now it's time to be that catalyst. This is Dr. Brad Cooper of Catalyst Coaching 360. Make it a great rest of your week, and I'll speak with you soon on the next episode of the Catalyst 360 podcast, or maybe over on the YouTube coaching channel.